Hey everyone, I'm Eric. Welcome back to another episode of the SDR Game podcast. My guest today is Kyle Smith, managing partner at the Bridge Group. So, welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Before we start, can you introduce yourself and let us know what you do at the Bridge Group?
Of course. Yeah, my name is Kyle Smith, as you said, managing partner for the Bridge Group. Just for a little bit of background in terms of where some of my perspectives will come from, we are a sales consulting organization, work almost exclusively with B2B technology organizations, a lot of SaaS companies, and the sales function within them, or really the revenue generating function within them. So we work with teams like SDR, AE, CSM, or really whoever owns expansion and retention. And we do strategic assessments to design actual strategy, and then also write a lot of playbooks and do trainings and things like that, much more tactical. And so my role within the business is to actually execute on those engagements and bring on more customers who have a need for those services. So focus on both sides of the business in my current role.
For me, how I learned about the Bridge Group actually was through the book of Trish also, and thanks to the SDR Metrics Report you are publishing, because for me as an SDR leader it helped me also to use that with my team. So thank you for all the work you are doing around this.
Yeah, I can't I can't take too much credit for either one of those things, but no, Trish put a lot of time, energy, and effort into the book. So anytime somebody says that they enjoyed reading it, it's makes me happy. Obviously, a lot of years of experience going into it, but a ton of writing time too. And then Matt Bertuzzi on our team is our head of research and operations, and he does the annual reports for
Okay.
both SDRs and AEs. So yeah, they're a super helpful benchmarking tool. I see. It's funny when we engage with clients, we'll look at like board presentations or decks, and I'll see little snippets from our reports in there, and that makes me happy too. It feels like it's actually worth the time investment because people can actually practically apply some of the benchmarking.
I want to talk with you about the current market. So obviously for those who are going to listen, you are going already reading the headline of this episode, but I want to talk with you about what's happening on the market right now from both perspectives. The companies who are hiring SDRs, but also from the candidate perspective. So can you let us know what's changing right now on the market?
Specifically in the last few months, we've started to see a slight shift where we basically had a 18-month-ish run where it was so heavily favored in terms of it being a candidates market, where we had incredible price competition. We saw salaries and actual overall packages increased pretty dramatically as the competition for talent got pretty stiff. And people were able to be really selective in terms of which organizations they wanted to work with. We saw a lot of job hunting or job hopping rather, and attrition was through the roof, right? A lot of trouble actually retaining people because you could keep jumping and making more money, and people are offering more and more. In the last few months, we've seen that slow down quite a bit. A couple of metrics that actually tell us what's happening. Total applicants per job posting is up. So we're actually seeing that the companies are able to be a little bit more selective in terms of who they bring on, which we know when that happens, that typically leads to lower attrition because you can actually find the right fit for your role in company rather than just trying to get a body in a seat to hit whatever your headcount goals are. And we're seeing less attrition, a little, at least a little bit less voluntary attrition. I think there's probably a lot of reasons for that that I could guess at, but that's just what we're seeing in terms of the overall impact on the market. And that's working with like 25 tech companies right now, and they're all experiencing similar things.
So let's talk about first the candidate perspective. So because before they had more control around this, and companies are more selective. So what changed for them? So how can they adapt to this new how do you say it? This new not journey, but the way that companies are looking for candidates right now?
I would say in two ways. I'll start with just where you apply, right? The most simple action that you can take rather than hunting for like the best possible financial opportunity. If you're talking about plus or minus 10%, which a lot of these job decisions are made based on plus or minus 10% of actual on target earnings. I would take a little bit, especially if you're earlier in career. We're talking SDRs, like early in career individuals mostly, and you're talking about making a uh, job decision based on an on-target earnings that's plus or minus 10%. Pick the job, the company, the technology, the target market, the persona, the location, the management infrastructure, the funding if that's of interest, like the size. Like think about all the attributes of the actual organization you're going to work with before the comp plan. As long as the comp plan is in a reasonable range and on par with the market to some extent, if it were me, I wouldn't hunt for the best possible comp plan. Instead, just pick the place that you think is going to allow you to grow and to develop into the seller that you want to be over trying to make five, six, I don't know, $10,000 this year or the next 12 months more than you would at the other place. Just pick the right spot because that's a more likely long-term indicator for success, in my opinion.
So yeah, the environment before the complaint, and how can you do right now that you as a candidate, how can they prevent that, for example, they're going to join a company that maybe they're not doing well right now? Because right now, with the in November was the toughest month in layoff, for example, in the tech industry. So, what can a candidate can do before applying or during the hiring process to prevent that? For example, to prevent that or be aware of that.
You can't prevent it, right? Especially like so. There's only so much information that you're going to have at your disposal, and as an SDR, I don't think it's a reasonable expectation for you to uh, comb through every potential company's earnings and try to predict the future in terms of what they're going to do for headcount decisions. But instead, you can focus on things like overall growth, headcount growth. Does it seem like they've potentially overhired? Ask difficult questions in the hiring process. Just like understand what the team has looked like, what they're trying to get to in headcount, why they're trying to get to that headcount level. I like backdoor reference checks, honestly. Like, so if it were me, if I'm applying for an SDR role, I might reach out, like go on LinkedIn and find two people who are in an SDR role there. Hopefully that you have some type of second degree connections to maybe, and just reach out to them and see if you can get a really candid conversation with them to happen and just say like, hey, what is it like? Like, how many target accounts do you have? Are people hitting quota? Like, or do we have a team who's overstaffed? We're trying to oversaturate the market to achieve really aggressive growth goals, and we know that this is going to need to be right sized in the future. Like, those are some things that might stick out to me, like that are a little bit more easy to identify, rather than the actual company's financial performance. Like, just focus on your team, like what's actually happening within the team that you're going to join, and do they think that if nobody's hitting quota and territories are really small, like to me, that's an indicator that we're probably going to at least slow the growth of that team, if not potentially think about shrinking it to expand the territories, get more reps at quota, more productivity per head. So that's the one area that I would focus on that I think is a little bit easier to identify.
Oh, yeah, and you're right on this because yeah, the I think talking with Asia on the run it's easier and generally they are going to give you the info. In fact, when you are going to ask them, they're going to give you that information. So uh, you mentioned that you have two topics because I asked you the other question, but first thing you told me focus on the company, the team, the technology, the buyer personas instead of the complaint. And then when I ask you the question, you give me some perspective on what they can look for to see if the company is in good state. And what was the number two you are going to give me?
Yeah, focus on something that's a good fit for you culturally. Like, so I'm going on slightly softer stuff here, but I think it's important, especially within the SDR function. So look for something that's a good cultural fit. And if you do, then you're going to be more invested in the organization and your career development there. And don't rush. Like, take your time in the SDR role to actually solidify the skill of prospecting and creating opportunities, which is going to be really helpful in any role that you take after. But focus on taking your time with a company where you have a good cultural fit, you like the product and the market that they sell into, rather than just rushing to be like, how quickly can I become an AE? We did a research report. It's a little bit older now, but we did one. I think it was in 2018 or 2019, in terms of SDR success rate based on time frame to promotion. And for those who were promoted within or under 15 months of tenure within the SDR role, they were out. Almost 70% were out of the AE role within 2 quarters and moved on to another company, and maybe they still get an AE role. And then that 15-month mark seemed to be the line that had the most statistical significance and likelihood to be successful in the AE function. Those who waited even more than like 18 months were much more likely to stay within the AE role for longer periods of time after promotion. So I think the one thing is pick the right company based on all those other attributes. Don't chase the money right away. And then the second thing is take your time when you're actually in that role and make sure that you are a highly qualified, well-rounded applicant for the AE job, and don't just rush there, because if you want to talk about job stability, actually performing once you get there, not just getting the title, actually performing once you are an AE is pretty important. If you go 2 quarters, pretty low quota attainment in a revenue generating role, it's going to be tough to maintain that position.
And also, to go back on what you're saying, focusing on the right environment, because if you are in the right company to be successful in the role, if you are not chasing just the title, you want to perform in your role, I think it's also important, because if you are just looking to be an AE and then you leave the company just to be an AE, you're not going to be focusing maybe on the right companies to after. And when you're starting the new role, maybe also it's not going to help the person in the role.
Yeah, and maybe if
Yeah.
you're just chasing the title and doing it prematurely, then yeah, I mean that absolutely can and does happen all the time.
Yeah.
We see that. We see a lot of sometimes it's not a great name, but we call them like retreads, but people who leave the company because they thought the grass was greener, jump to that new role, that new company. That AE role is not all that it was cracked up to be. They don't have the same level of support that they said they were going to have in terms of
Yeah.
training or lead gen or whatever. SCEs, it could be anything. And then all of a sudden they realize like, oh, I've made a huge mistake. Like I rushed this, and maybe it was going to be another quarter or two before I could have had this position, and I wasn't uh, willing to wait that long. But
Yeah.
then we see them go back to the company that they were with previously, and then continue on the path that they were on anyway. So it's not like it's the end of the road,
Yeah.
or like the worst thing. It's like a little detour, but if you can avoid those, why not? Like save yourself the frustration and anxiety associated with making that move, and just take your time. I mean, there's instances where it might get egregious, and you just have to realize like there's nowhere for me to go here. But if we're talking about the first 18 months, you're not there yet. If you start getting 2 years, 2.5 years, depending on your deal size, is usually a good indicator for that. It might be time to think about where your next opportunity lies.
Hey, what would you say to an SDR right now who are listening to this and thinking about actually leaving the company because it's not promoted in the next few months and want to move to another company to be an A?
How long have they been in the role?
I don't know, maybe a year, let's say.
A year?
Yeah.
I would say wait six
Yeah.
months. The market could change a lot in 6 months. I know that there's a lot of noise about what the economy is going to do in the next year. We see some leading indicators that might tell us, but we don't really know, right? Ultimately. So wait the 6 months for two reasons. One, see how things shake out and how things start to stabilize. And then two, just focus on the thing is when you get anxious to make a move, usually it's because you feel like growth is stagnated. Maybe it's your frustration with earnings. Maybe you want to go whatever, buy that house, and you know that you need to make more money to do it. Maybe there's things in your personal life that dictate like I need to increase my earnings. When you're starting a family, whatever. I don't whatever the personal reasons are. I understand those are true, meaningful motivations, and you have to do what you have to do for yourself. But if you have the flexibility to wait and you do feel stagnated, there's things that you can do personally. Consume podcasts, like learn as much outside your organization as possible. Read books, consume podcasts, read blogs, look at research reports. Start to take your own professional development into your own hands. There are so many resources available. If you feel like it's not your company's sole responsibility for your professional development, so take some accountability. Say, okay, what I get to do here is make money and actually practice the job function of creating pipeline. But what I can also do in addition to that, if I'm not getting a ton of training internally, is learn as much as possible about, yes, my current role, but also what it might be like in the next role. Maybe I'm going to go watch, I don't know, 15 uh, YouTubes on how to lead a best practice discovery call or something. I don't know. Read a bunch of blog posts about how to execute effective discovery, which is the next logical step in the process. And so you're just learning more and more so that you, when you're ultimately making that move, you are better prepared. But just hold on if you're at that 1 year mark for as much as possible, to see if you can continue to learn and actually put some of those ideas into practice rather than making a jump before you're ready and uh, really floundering when you get to that next position, which is not as nurturing as an SDR role might be when you get to the AE role.
On top of that, I think there is two things. So I think, like you said, they can focus on their skills as an SDR, be better, and that's what I think generally with some SDR works with. They wanted to have their AE promotion, and they were thinking that they knew everything as an SDR. And something I think that's also a point that I, I have some people with that is, hey, let's think about also the skills you can still improve on instead of thinking that maybe you are an A on every skills you have on SDR. So meanwhile, you are preparing for the next role, you can improve because the skills that you are learning as an SDR, they are going to help you as an AE. Because like you mentioned earlier, if one day as an AE, you don't have enough support to generate pipeline, well, you are going to need to prospect again. And the skills you are building right now, they're going to uh, help you in your next one. So that was for the pipeline creation skills. And now, like you mentioned, the skills as an AE, I think yeah, that's key here because I think there is a lot of content that can help prep them for the next role or so, and obviously it will be easier for them for their transition.
Yeah, if you can prospect to self gen, like if you actually get really good as a, especially outbound SDR, focus on them. If you're an excellent outbound SDR, when you get to an AE role, you can just manufacture money. Like, sure, you might be supported by sales development, you might get some high value inbound from marketing, you might have some field marketing events that source you some quality deals, you might get some referrals, some partner network, whatever. But if all of those added up only get you to 90% of your quota and the model's just a little bit off in terms of how the company structured it to get you to your goal, you can go out and then just go get the last 10%. Or maybe it gets you to 100 and you want to be deep into your accelerators and really increase your earning, go prospect and self gen the other 20% of the revenue. Like, that prospecting muscle can be utilized to make you a really high performing rep at any point in your career, without a doubt. The other thing is too, if you're trying to look at like how far away am I from being ready, I should have said this to begin with. First and foremost, make sure that you are performing really well in the role that you're in now. Like, if you already have an eye to the future in the next role and you're not already performing at a very high level in your current role, we're looking at things all wrong. Like, you have to be really good at what you're doing now for anyone to say, well, the success you're having in this role tells me that you might be able to be successful in the next. It's not based on time. It's not just like, well, I'm up next, I've been here for this long, right? Like, you need to be performing at a high level. And if you're doing that, then also you typically you're going to create some more flexibility in terms of what you can do with your working hours. So if I'm already at 110% a goal, maybe somebody will let me go shadow 2 or 3 discovery calls with an AE. Maybe I can, if you have Gong or something like that, maybe I can just go watch a demo from somebody and look at, like, and start to actually view how are some of the later buyer interactions executed, and what do I not know now that I might need to. And it can be humbling, which can be helpful. Like, also, I don't want to sound too preachy, like I was this person, like I was an SDR. I thought I was ready to be promoted to an AE after like 7 months, right? And it can be a humbling experience. Thankfully I had a manager who wouldn't allow me to, and who kept on challenging me to be better in the role that I was at. But without that individual like holding me in seat, um, I would have been promoted to the AE and just failed miserably. Like, I was the high performer, but I did not have the skills necessary to be an AE after that much time. Like, you have to take your time. So like I was that person. I get it. I understand the drive to like keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. What's next? But the benefit of hindsight, you can say it's it's helpful to take your time and solidify the skill.
Earlier, you are giving us advice on what a candidate should do. What advice should a candidate, an SDR candidate right now, what advice should they ignore?
Sorry, can you say that again?
I'm sorry. Earlier we were talking about you give us some advice or focus on the company, the right environment instead of chasing money. Focus on your current roles and perform also. And now let's talk about one advice that they should ignore during their job research.
I'm not sure.
You're not sure?
Yeah.
That's good.
What do you think?
Job hopping. So what you are saying earlier. Yeah, well, it's yeah. We already talked about this on top of that. Yeah, yeah. Just to follow up on this, I think it's be patient with your current role instead of just waiting to get your next promotion, because if you are in the right company and the company is still growing, and like you were saying, the average attainment of the team is really high. You don't have any issues with the territory, so I think you are in the right environment. So you should stay at this company.
Yeah, and do you like who you're selling to? That's the other thing. Is like I'll use like security as an example. Like the product could be incredible, the company could be really healthy, but if you just don't feel like you like having conversations with CISOs or IT security professionals all day, if the way that they think and the way that they work through problems and that just that conversation in general is not of interest to you or won't be long term, like an amazing space and really an excellent opportunity for a lot of people. But if you find that that's just not right to you and you would rather sell to marketing, HR, finance, like somebody maybe not even in IT or IT, but you want to sell to the developer side versus just IT security. Like, do you like having those conversations with that profile of individual every day? Would be another thing that you want to take into consideration. That's not necessarily a reason why I would hop like this early in career, but it's something that you should be thinking about. Is that like there's a lot of technology companies who sell to every buyer persona imaginable in every profile of organization. So thinking about that a little bit can be helpful. I don't know if it's going to lead to any. It could lead to the selection process of which company you go to, but without the benefit of knowing what it's like to sell to those individuals, you can really only make that. You can really only make that determination with experience. You can't decide ahead of time whether or not you're going to like to sell to one profile versus another.
And what's I never sold to CISO, so what's the difference, for example, with other buyer persons?
The way that they analyze information or how they make the decision, the way that they respond to actual outreach attempts. Like if you sell to a CISO, your connect rate and email response rate might be significantly lower. When you get on the call, you might instantly get met with, well, we don't provide any of that information without an NDA in place. We're not going to tell you anything that we're currently using. Could be stuff like that. Versus if you sell to HR, marketing, or sales, individuals who pick up the phone with much more frequency. Um, they might not have the same budget for what it is that you're offering, like well, like a security department or IT in general. So there's different complications depending on who you're calling, but one might be tough because you might have like a 2% connect rate versus like one might be a 5.5, 6% connect rate, but they're tougher to convert because they're just like, yeah, that sounds great. We would love to have something like that, but it's never going to happen. We'll never get approval for that. So it's not worth scheduling the meeting. So it's like picking which one of those you'd be happier with. Do you want people who are like tough on you on the phone, who like press you? I don't mind that. Like I like those challenging conversations, um, and I like reality faster. Like let's just get to the answer. Like what are we gonna do here? Um, versus potentially somebody who's gonna allow you to do your whole pitch, talk through everything in detail, get you 11 minutes into a conversation just to find out like there's no way that this is ever gonna work or be a fit or move forward. So that's personal preference. Like there's not a right or a wrong answer for that.
Yeah,
That's just what do you enjoy
prefer.
doing,
Yeah.
and what types of conversations do you want to have?
No, but that's good to know because that's something you want to know before getting in this room. So now that we've talked about the candidate perspective, let's talk about the company perspective. So
Yeah.
you said now they're more in control. They can be more selective. Can you give us more details around how companies are currently adapting to that? So you said they have less attrition.
Yeah, slightly less voluntary attrition, so less people quitting or resigning, at least in the past few months. We'll see if that continues. And then what that allows them to do is if they do have open positions, then and they get more applicants per job posting, then instead of just finding like the best of what they have, they can truly find the best for the role. Like if you only get 4 applicants and you really need to fill that seat, and especially if a hiring manager has a quota that is not based on headcount, it's just based on like your goal is your goal, and it's your job to make sure that you have a team. You might sit there and make a decision like, okay, of these 4 people, I don't think any of them are great or like a perfect fit, but I'm just going to pick the best one of the 4 and just extend them the offer right now rather than waiting. Because I know even if they operate at 70% a goal, that's better for me than it taking 2 more months, or you might make this decision, than it taking 2 more months for me to find the right person, the truly right person, because that's 2 months of an empty seat of nobody producing anything. So I personally don't love that. I realize there's a lot of pressure surrounding that, so that's not an easy decision to make. But what you can do, or what companies have been able to do a little bit more so in the last few months, is actually find the best possible person. Because instead of it being 4 applicants, it might be 18, 19, like how we're in the high teens. If you're a high profile company, it was always a little bit higher. But from some of the lesser known ones, you can get, you know, high teens applicants, and out of that group, you can actually find the right person typically. So you're finding somebody who aligns with you culturally, has the experience or background that you're looking for, has the actual desire to work for your company, not just somebody who's like, oh yeah, I'm just firing off applications everywhere and let's see who's going to make me the most appealing offer, rather than somebody saying like, no, I really want to work for your company for these 3 reasons, which puts you just in a better position where you don't feel like you're constantly needing to sell your role and not able to actually do proper evaluations of the candidates, which it felt like for a little while there.
And so, do you think companies are taking more time to evaluate those candidates, or they are trying to hire faster? Or, uh,
I think speed to hire has always been a point of emphasis. There's still we talk about like run the hiring process like you would a sales process, and it should be done quickly, right? Like time kills all deals. Same could be said for the actual hiring process. So I don't think that there's more time taken. I think that it just needs to potentially be higher volume, and people need to be maybe a little bit better about uh, actual process adherence. If you have more applicants, right? Like, let's get through the screening process faster. Let's make sure that we have people lined up to actually go through the formal interviews with hiring managers, call shadows, role plays, just like making sure that I don't think it should be elongated at all. I would never advocate for elongating that process, because while maybe you have a little bit more control, there's still other companies who are actively hiring. And if it takes you a month to get somebody an offer, they've already accepted a job somewhere else. So you still need to get from application to offer inside of 10 days if possible. Um, otherwise,
business days,
you,
or
yeah, like
yeah,
2 weeks basically.
2 weeks? Yeah.
But better if you can do it faster. But that depends. Like, is there going to be an on-site component? Is it just a remote role? Remote role way faster and easier, because you're not trying to facilitate in-office time and coordinating that around multiple people's schedules and everything. So um, yeah, it should still happen very quickly, regardless of the applicant pool. And that's where you lean on if you're in a fortunate enough position to have a talent acquisition team. Lean on them to get you to your shortlist faster, and at least prioritize applicants who are most likely to be a great fit for your role.
what advice would you give to an SDR leader who try to improve his hiring process right now?
I struggle with this one because I have a little bit of recency bias, but a lot of the companies that I work with are on the larger side. Me personally, the ones I have intimate knowledge of are on the larger side. And when you work for the larger companies, there's way more constraints on in terms of what the process looks like and how talent is to be evaluated, which is good. Like there's so many positives that have come from that process. But for you, just making sure that you have there's little things. I'll say two things that I would try to force into the process wherever possible. Have them shadow somebody on my team so that I can get two things. One, understand from the rep that I have them shadowing, what questions do they ask? How curious are they about our process? How attentive are they to the you making calls? Like, do they really dig into details of like, I don't know, how you're using your sales engagement platform or the CRM, or why you're calling that contact versus the second one down on the list? Why you said the thing you said versus something else? Like, what questions do they ask in that actual shadowing process, or do they just sit there and just go through the motions? Also gives you an idea. They typically lower their guard a little bit more when they're with a rep. So let's do a double check on that culture fit. Like, does this seem like somebody that the rep you have them shadowing would want to work with? Do you feel like they'd be a positive contribution to the team? We talk about like not cultural fit, but and I know I've used that terminology, but less about cultural fit because we don't want cookie cutter. We want cultural contribution. Will they bring something positive to the team, or will they be a detractor and drive down morale and maybe be a little bit toxic? So focusing on those things with a shadow session can be really eye-opening. I found those to be hugely helpful. And then doing a role play. I want to see you do it. Like it's tough, especially for the SDR role. We can do personality profile assessments. We can understand prior potentially relevant work experience, but I want to hear and see you do it. So I want to see you actually put some words down on paper. Can you write an effective email? Or if you have no training whatsoever, at least are you heading in the right direction? Did you try? To uh, leave some type of prospecting email that could elicit a response. Like, what are some of the skills that I'm working with? And if it's horrible, I can provide feedback, have them take a second try, and I can get an early preview of coachability. Like, do they respond to feedback well, and can they adjust as a result? Like that. If I have somebody who can put forth effort and they're coachable, like those are basically the raw skills necessary to be a successful SDR. So that process allows you to do it, and then you do a cold call. Like if you're doing in-person interviews, some people can interview really well in person. Like can, um, they just carry themselves really well in in-person interviews. That doesn't necessarily directly tie to what it's going to be like making a cold call where you don't have any of the same advantages. You can't use um, facial expressions, you can't use body language, you can't engage with people in the same way when you're just making cold calls all day, right? So have them make a cold call to either you or somebody who plays prospect. How do they do in that setting? Make sure that you're doing some double checks to identify whether or not they'd be successful in the role and be a positive contribution to your team. So the shadowing a current rep and running them through role play scenarios are the two big ones that I would want as part of my hiring process if I was a hiring manager who had flexibility over what the rep does.
What else do you do to assess coachability? Do you have something else on top of the mock call, the role play with cold calls or writing an email?
I like I'm a fan of some of the actual personality profile assessments. We've used a bunch of not we our clients have used a bunch of different ones. So there's not like one or only one that I think, but some of those do a pretty good job of assessing some of that. I don't have a much better way outside of those. So if you have the opportunity to use personality profile assessments, some of those can be pretty good. Outside of that, no, I mean, I want to see it firsthand, like with the role play that I talked about.
Yeah, so for me, stuff that I found useful with role plays is when you give the feedback, there is three things I'm checking. So how they react to the feedback. Are they defensive? And here that's a red flag generally about this. And I have had in interviews, yeah, people being defensive about the feedback I was giving them. Then do they take notes about the feedback I gave him? And then the last one is are they asking questions also about the feedback? And obviously, like you were mentioning during when they are shadowing a rep, are they asking question here? The same, are they asking question about the feedback I give them? So I think that's super useful. So
Yeah, the other thing is, Trish Bertuzzi, our founder, she called it the 2-question interview, and it was, what do you know about me, and what do you know about my company? And that's how she would start a lot of interviews. And it's so simple, but it tells you so much, right? Because talking about like running the hiring process, like a sales process, like that is a perfect example of what the job is like. You do pre-call planning, you research your target account, you um, cater your messaging based on the individual specifically that you're speaking with, right? So knowing that they had just gone through the simple process of like understanding at a basic level, what does our company do, like what's the actual products or services that we sell, like do you know anything about the team, or like have you read any press releases, did you go on my LinkedIn profile, do you know anything about my background, like some of the basic things that I would always expect that somebody would do in the prospecting process. Let's see if they did it in the interview process. Did you do your homework before you showed up to this meeting to make sure that you could make the best use of both of our time? So I think that's another great one. Like, what do you know about my company or me personally?
and so do you stop the interviewer if they can't answer one of those two questions?
I wouldn't. I think she used to, but but uh, I think I feel bad for paraphrasing, but I believe what she said is not stop the interview, like stop the interview process,
Okay.
but say, okay, well, go ahead and
Oh,
do some
okay, okay.
preparation,
Yeah.
and then when you're ready, come back and we can continue this conversation.
Okay. No, I like that because that's the job of an SDR. So, and generally, at what stage can you use those two questions during the first interview with the hiring manager or with the recruiter, for example?
Both. Um, Yeah, I'm thinking about it more from a hiring manager perspective because I've never been a recruiter or in talent acquisition. I think the talent acquisition or the screening phase gives a lot of the answers to the test, if you will, because they share so much information about the team and the company, right? Like, because they're trying to sell the role too. So they might have a lot of that information just given to them by the recruiter, but I think you can do it in both scenarios. And also be interesting, this is a little bit more labor intensive, but understand, did the knowledge get deeper as they got further into the process? Like, did they build on their learnings, or do they still only know really high level information, or are they continuing to expand on what they've already learned? There's just so much publicly available information about just about everyone, at least in our space. I'll just keep it specific to tech. There's so much publicly available information that you can learn a lot leading into a conversation like an interview.
What are bad recommendations you hear in hiring SDRs from the company perspective?
Go hire someone who looks like blank. Pick the top performer and try to find somebody who matches that exact profile. People don't really do that anymore, so it's not a great one. That's kind of been moved out, but that used to happen a lot more. It's like, go find somebody who looks like our top performer, our top 2 performing reps, like in terms of personality profile, background, whether it's athletic, academic, or professional. Um, yeah, I'm not a fan of that. I've worked with so many reps of so many different profiles, and some of them at the same company who do the job in dramatically different ways and who are still hugely successful.
So switching from the academic profile to more trade perspective, are you saying?
No, just no, just focusing on, because especially specific to the SDR role, professional experience is nice if they know some basics. But what do you get from that? You know that they're making a conscious decision to stay in this role, which is really difficult. They are maybe familiar with generally CRM utilization or sales engagement platform. Maybe you got over like a couple of like the early stage hurdles, but you still need to find a person who's coachable, who's motivated, and who actually is going to work well within your team, right? Like, and those things you evaluate regardless of past experience. Like, that's just about the individual. Mostly, I don't know how you. Maybe it's just me, but I don't know how to make somebody put forth more effort. If they're not somebody who's going to hustle or work hard or attempt to achieve their desired outcomes. Yeah, a comp plan, sure, but I mean even beyond that, right? Like bigger than that. And then coachability is really tough. Like, how do you make someone coachable? You can try, but that's a tough road. So I think focusing on those innate characteristics at the SDR level. Again, if it were a different role, I would focus way more on professional experience because you just have that's your better knowledge base. But in those early roles, I would care less about professional experience, more about who are you as an individual.
We're at the end of the interview, Kyle. So it was super interesting conversation. Thank you for taking the time today. But I don't want to end it soon like this. So is there anything that you would like to share? Is there any type of closing comments, requests for the audience? Anything you would like to point people to?
If you're a hiring manager and if you're advocating for like your team or trying to understand where your team stacks up against other like groups, like check out our research reports. SDR Research Metrics and Compensation Report comes out every other year. We'll have one out in Q1 of next year, the latest installment. So anytime you're trying to see like where does my team stack up, it's a great um, way to see like how is your team performing against a lot of others in your industry. So I would lean on that. Outside of that, I would say just consume as much content as possible on both the hiring manager and the applicant front. Do not be solely reliant on your company to feed you every bit of information to make yourself a better either sales leader or SDR.
Thank you, Kyle. It was nice to see you, and thanks everyone for listening.